All right, good morning. Welcome to day 3 of JNUC. Excellent to see everyone here today. We are joined by Brad Chapman, who's a Mac systems engineer at NBC Universal and is rather famous at JNUC for bringing excellent pop culture references. I don't think we're going to be disappointed today. His session is Quantum Leap, using smart groups to migrate Wi-Fi and certificate settings on 10,000 Macs. Please feel free to add questions on the app, and welcome Brad.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everybody, and hope you're having a good JNUC so far, and hello to all of our virtual attendees watching at home and playing along on the at-home game. My name is Brad Chapman. I'm a systems engineer at NBC Universal, and I have been with the company a number of years, and we get all sorts of interesting challenges brought to our team of Mac engineers. And before we get too much further, for those of you who want to get the slides to read along at your own pace, this is a link to the PDF. I'll give you a few seconds to grab that, and then I'll kind of dive into the presentation and what we're doing today. Okay, so this is about a project that we did to migrate Wi-Fi and certificate settings on all of the Macs on our fleet from an old configuration to a new configuration. And so we had to think about how we were going to achieve this and try out some different methods and see which ones were going to work and which ones were not. And we ideally wanted to make it as easy as possible. So this took a lot of planning and thinking about this. But I'm going to show you how we got to there, how we got to the solution. I'll describe the entire solution and show you step by step how it works, and then give you sort of the detail or the background of why it's so powerful and why Jamf does this probably better than any other MDM solution out there, and give you some notes about the specific technical implementation in our rollout. Now, the challenge that we had was that there was a legacy certificate tool in place that had that only worked on the VPN or in the office. Now, this was put in place before the pandemic, before anybody thought we'd all be working from home. And it had kind of a funky, unclear end user experience where were a lot of manual steps that the user had to take, and also things that the IT department had to do for them, like adding them to an Active Directory group to have the rights to get the certificate. And in addition, every time they added the certificate, they would be prompted for their keychain password to trust the certificate. It was a huge pain because every time the certificate renewed every year, they had to do all of this all over again. And if that certificate expired while they were off network, well, then they're calling the help desk, and it's a huge ordeal, so it was not fun. There were frequent support escalations, and despite all the documentation that we created, there were some challenges. When the Apple Silicon platform came up, there was this problem where the utility wouldn't even launch anymore because it was Intel only. Then, of course, we had the pandemic. We all had to shift our entire deployment and management paradigms, working at home. Now users can't even get the cert because they're not in the building anymore. So we had to ask the cybersecurity team to create a temporary certificate as a stopgap just so that they could get on the VPN and then get their actual certificate. So we had a request from senior leadership in IT's, I think there was a VP or SVP of network engineering, and he had been talking to the client services folks and wanted to make this really easy for our end users. Ideally, the certificate to be deployed from anywhere, and it would require zero user interaction whatsoever. They would automatically install, and it would automatically be trusted on the Mac for any application and service that needed it. Most particularly, though, we needed it for the Wi-Fi in the office, and we also needed it for VPN, working from home. And, oh, sorry about that. My bad, got too fast. So, yeah, VPN and Wi-Fi were the main applications for the certificate. Then the next part of this challenge that they gave us. So this was in October of 2022, right after JNUC. They said, we need to go from proof of concept to production in 6 weeks. And we needed to complete the rollout more or less within 90 days. Now, I put a big asterisk on there because there were some questions that came up during this rollout, some objections from different business units, concerns, whatnot, that kind of slowed things down. But that was the ideal goal that we'd set. Then we had a couple of other obstacles with change freezes. We had our FIFA World Cup event last winter that had a global hard freeze for about 6 weeks. We were really, really close to starting this deployment, and then that came up and we had to delay it, but that was understandable. And then, of course, the end of your holiday freezes, most companies would have to deal with this. We do as well, but we did get it done. Now, as we were thinking about how to deploy the new profiles and do this migration, we came up with some different ideas. The first thing we thought of was, well, let's just ask the users to install it themselves. Well, what's the advantage of that? Well, we wouldn't really need much of a change approval process because the user is taking the action. We're not forcing them to do anything right away. It would probably be some kind of interactive step-by-step thing, and the user could do it at their convenience. But we would need end-user communications, and we'd have to, build in a lot of room for error and think about some what-if scenarios if the user doesn't understand it or if it doesn't work. They just might call into the help desk anyway because they don't want to do it or don't understand it, and they would have a really long tail for the deployment. It might take a couple years to get done. Who knows? We'd have to start bugging users anyway. So we rejected this one pretty quickly. The second option we thought of, well, let's install it on new Macs only and, have a clear cutoff between old Macs and new Macs. Again, not much change approval required for this. There would be not a whole lot of user communication needed because it would just be something that's part of their new Mac experience and would happen at a refresh or in a new hire. But the full rollout for something like this could take several years because of our refresh cycle, and we'd have to maintain this legacy system for a while, and it may become an upgrade blocker in the future. So we rejected that one. Option 3, well, I didn't propose this, but our Wi-Fi engineer did at first, and he says, what if we just edit the configuration profile in place? Well, technically, you would get everything done in one step. However, you would be impacting every system at once. There would be a massive spike of traffic on the Wi-Fi network. It might bring it to a halt. We would not be able to phase the rollout at all, and it would be extremely risky. We would require a lot of testing, et cetera, so that was rejected pretty quickly as well. Burn that one down, kill it with fire, no way. So we thought about, okay, if we can't edit the existing one, we probably are going to have to install something new anyway. So let's install a new profile with a new and different SSID. Well, okay. Installing a new profile can be rolled out gradually at any pace you want. You track and report that progress in Jamf. The change approval process would be fairly straightforward, at least from our side. However, adding a new profile with a different SSID would mean a new Wi-Fi network name, which could have some branding issues for your company. You may not want to call it something else, or it might be too similar to the previous name. And then the Wi-Fi engineer realized that by adding more SSIDs, you could cause Wi-Fi performance degradation. And again, that may be a problem with networks that have 5 or 6 or 7 SSIDs. If you only have 2 or 3, it's probably not a deal. But for them, the change approval window was 30 days for enterprise-wide Wi-Fi changes. So that was going to blow our project deadline pretty quick. So we rejected that one. Then we thought, what if we swap the profiles but use the same SSID? So install a new profile and then remove the old one. Sounds reasonable enough. We would be able to track this, do a gradual rollout. There would be some moderate change approval required due to the potential complexity of doing this, and then we would maybe need to tell the end users what was happening. But in testing, we learned something, that when you have a configure profile with Wi-Fi installed, and then you install another one with the same SSID, and then remove the old one, the Mac forgets the SSID. It drops off the saved network list. So even though you have this profile installed with a managed Wi-Fi network, it will not automatically reconnect. And so the user would have to go click on the corporate network anyway. So that was not ideal. We could probably have done this, but we didn't like the idea of having the user have to take a step or call into the help desk saying, my Mac's not connecting to the Wi-Fi. So we rejected this one. So we've gone through a whole bunch of options, and we're Really not sure what we're going to do, but then out of the blue, a little portal appeared, and a man was like running around frantically, tapping a little tablet and cursing some guy named Ziggy, and we weren't sure what his problem was. But that gave me an idea. Quantum Leap, the smarter Wi-Fi migration. So, what is Quantum Leap? Well, it's going to use an intermediary network to take the MAC from the corporate Wi-Fi to another Wi-Fi network, and then back to corporate Wi-Fi. So in our network, in our environment, we had a corporate Wi-Fi network. We had a Wi-Fi mobile network, which was intended for phones at first, but also allowed users to bring their own computers or mobile devices, and they would have internet access, but not intranet access. And they could use either a certificate or username and password, which would be their company credentials. We did have a visitor network, but it required a registration to use, and it was a captive portal, so that would not have allowed a seamless transition from one Wi-Fi network to another. So we decided not to use that. So we were looking at using the Wi-Fi mobile network as the intermediary. So here is the whole process of how Quantum Leap does its thing and how we change the profiles over. So we start off with a Mac that has the original Wi-Fi profile. We have Cisco. That's no surprise. Most big companies do. The first thing that happens is that the machine checks into Jamf, and it's issued an MDM command to install a new profile, and it's called Quantum Leap, that contains the Wi-Fi settings for the mobile network and the service account that we set up for this. The next thing that happens is the Mac sends back the list of profiles that are on that machine, and it tells Jamf, hey, here's what I've got now. Jamf does a recalculation of the smart group criteria, and then it figures out the next action, which is to remove the old profile that was on that machine. And when that happens, Quantum Leap becomes the default. There is a brief Wi-Fi transition for people who are in the building on Wi-Fi. Once that profile is in place and it becomes the default, the computer tells Jamf, this is what I've got now. Jamf does a smart group recalculation, and then it figures out the next step, which is now it's in scope for the ADCS profile that we're loading. Now, I know this presentation says ADCS, but the techniques I'm describing here can be used with any type of certificate deployment for Wi-Fi. So if you're going to use Venafi, or if you have something else, maybe an Acme-based certificate in the future, this technique also applies. So the new profile connects to Corp using the ADCS certificate that was generated at that time and is embedded in the profile. So now the profile is installed. There are 2 profiles present on the machine. The Mac tells Jamf, here's my list of profiles. Jamf recalculates, and now it tells that Mac, go ahead and remove Quantum Leap. You're done. Quantum Leap disappears. There's another Wi-Fi transition as it goes to the corporate network. The Mac updates the list of profiles one more time. By the way, all those list profiles commands trigger an inventory update. Not a Jamf agent inventory update, but they cause an update in the inventory of the device record in Jamf. So now the migration is complete. So Quantum Leap, we liked it because we could deploy it pretty quickly, and we could track it and report it in Jamf. We could roll it out as slowly or as quickly as we wanted to. It avoids the Wi-Fi amnesia problem of the previous solution. And the change approval, once we explained how it worked and we gave a demo presentation of the process, both our IT support personnel and management understood how it was supposed to work. We gave them a demo, and they were satisfied with it. We had to do a lot of testing on different hardware, both Intel and Apple Silicon, and on multiple operating systems to understand if this would work at all and how far back we could support it for. And then also to understand the behavior of the computer in different scenarios, at home, on the Wi-Fi, or maybe connected to Ethernet. And we did discover that if you were on Wi-Fi, there would be just a brief little hop from one Wi-Fi network to another. The hard requirement for us, we did use WPA3 encryption. So the minimum OS that supports that is Catalina, which by this time we're, Big Sur, Monterey, and a few people on Ventura at this point. This was last year. And they also wanted the certificate to be instantly revocable in Jamf. The certificate is issued to the username, but it is installed at the computer level. So it's available system-wide. And by the way, most of our deployment is laptops, like 80 to 90%, so it's a one-to-one deployment. Now, for planning purposes, we had 5 different teams involved. Ourselves, the Wi-Fi engineers, the VPN team, mostly for confirmation, the PKI or cybersecurity team to generate the certificates for us and to validate our processes, and the identity management team to confirm that we were doing everything correctly. We had weekly status calls and working sessions. Then we had presentations to executives and support staff. We advised our value-added reseller that we were changing this process and they would not need to do any of this for our end users anymore. And then we had some knowledge-based articles that we published internally, and of course lots and lots and lots of testing to prove that this would actually do what we expected it to do. So the user experience is that if they were at home or on remote, they would see no impact because the profiles were changing in the background while they were connected on their home Wi-Fi. And since we weren't managing their personal Wi-Fi network, the computer would just stay connected to whatever they were on at home, and it would make these changes in the background. People in the building on Ethernet, again, would not see any impact because Wi-Fi is a secondary connection. It would just be modifying the config in the background, and it would never connect to it. If they were on the Wi-Fi in the building, as I mentioned, there would be a brief hop, as by design, because they're disconnecting from one Wi-Fi network and joining another. It's a managed network, so the Mac will try to connect to it first and prioritize that. But there would be little hops. So if for some reason the Wi-Fi stalled, let's say maybe there were a lot of people that happened to be doing this, they showed up on Tuesday morning, and we got 4,000 computers hitting the Wi-Fi, and maybe a couple of them didn't connect in time. All they had to do was just turn it off and then turn it on again, and then Jamf would pick up where it left off and continue sending instructions to the Mac. To verify this, we, again, in the support article, showed our support staff where they could find the profiles, and then they would see the name of the profile here, and they could confirm that it was assigned to the actual end user, and then here's where it looks like in Ventura and Sonoma. And if you look at the keychain utility, you can see it here in the system keychain. So it's got their name on it, and that's how they know it's all done. So why does this work so well? It works so well for 2 reasons. 1, push notifications, and 2, Jamf smart groups. Push notifications are a tiny payload that's designed to be sent over the air. They were created in the late 2000s, and they were designed for cellular networks where you had like 3G or even Edge, and you had a very limited amount of bandwidth. And all the push notifications do is tell the device to do something else, like download a configuration profile. For more background on how those actually work, I recommend watching Rich Troughton's presentation from PSU Mac 2023, Introduction to Declarative MDM. He goes over the architecture of that and the flow. And then also, you might have seen a presentation at a previous JNUC by some guy, I don't know, it was called a Push Odyssey. And I go through the whole process of actually how the notifications arrive from, how they go from your MDM to Apple to the device. And I also dive into the architecture of APNS itself, Apple's push service. So the inventory update, as I said, is induced by installing a profile. When you send a push notification, the Mac retrieves the profile, and then it sends back an MDM command called profiles list. If you look in the Jamf management tab, you'll see a lot of the completed commands like iTunes account, profiles list, security, etc. Profiles list is one of those that gets sent back every single time you install a profile. The device record gets updated with your list of profiles. This triggers the smart group recalculation, which is why this works so well and we could do it so quickly. And then the new profiles would be in scope based on the list of profiles on the machine. So the cool thing about Jamf Smart Groups is they're actually patented. There were 2 patents issued in 2014 to 4 engineers at Jamf. Of course, most of you might remember Zach Halmstad. Then we have Matt Anderson, Brian Hengels, and Ryan Yonk. They patented not only the GUI workflow for designing smart groups, but the under-the-hood stuff that makes it happen. And this is an actual diagram from the patent filing for these 2 patents to show like the workflow, the administrator using the console, and then making changes, and then inventory records update and trigger different actions on the computer. So Yeah, patent diagrams are weird. They have a lot of numbers on them, and they're referred to in the actual patent filing as what each item is, but you get the idea. I just thought it was really cool to see that diagram. So how did we do this? So there was some infrastructure that we needed and some configurations that we had to set. Of course, we're doing ADCS, so there was an actual Active Directory certificate server. We don't control that. That's the PKI team. And incidentally, that was already being used to install certificates on the 40,000 PCs that we already manage at our company. So we were just piggybacking on existing infrastructure there. We had to install the Jamf ADCS proxy server. And we also needed to install a certificate authority from our PKI to begin issuing certificates on behalf of the company root. We had to create 2 additional new profiles in Jamf. Then we had to create 4 smart groups. I mean, we created more than that for different reasons, but at minimum, you'd need 4, and I'll show you those. We also had an optional extension attribute if we wanted to opt somebody out of this process or opt them in. We created a smart group. That's, again, an optional one. That would either exclude the certificates from the machine if they opted out, or include them if they wanted to opt in and test early. Now, I'm not going to go in depth on certificates and PKI in this talk, but if you want to, just yesterday, Laurent Pertrois, I hope I said that right, he's a professional services engineer at Jamf, and he gave an excellent in-depth presentation about this stuff, and I highly recommend you see it. That is the link to the session on the JNUC, the JNUC 2023 portal, and I'm sure you'll be able to find that later once the video is posted. But seriously, go watch that if you want to learn about it. So for us, here's what we had to do. The PKI administrator had to create a certificate template on the ADCS server that gives an application the right to request a certificate be built, and you have to have the certificate name. So that one requires the MDM server like Jamf to supply the request to supply the subject name in the request. And for example, it would look like something like this. CN equals domain name / username. That's a pretty simple one. The PKI certificate authority is, again, something we installed in the PKI certificate section of Jamf. And there's a server and client relationship that 2 certificates that you have to install when you're setting that up for the first time. Laurent, he goes into depth, pretty good on this one, so he'll explain it. And the documentation for this is available in Jamf. You can hire professional services to help you with this if you want. We were able to get by with the documentation alone, so that was okay, but some of the certificate stuff can be hideously complex or make your brain hurt, like you've had a slushie. So if that happens, then definitely call them, because I know some good people there, and they're very, very helpful. So we had the 3 configuration profiles, as I mentioned. We have A, B, and C, the original Wi-Fi profile, Quantum Leap, and ADCS. So A would be your original Wi-Fi profile, whatever you're using now. Really nothing to say about that. B would be the Quantum Leap, which is the alternate network that you're going to use for this to facilitate the transition. This is just the first page on the Wi-Fi payload. It's set to auto-join, and there's the WPA3 Enterprise for the credentials down there. And for the trust settings down here, you're going to choose, at least for us, we did PEEP to use a service account with a username and password. If you have to use a cert, you can use that here too. Alternatively, you can also use a very strong WPA2 pre-shared key. Something that you obviously wouldn't share, it would just be used for this. And then we needed to install a certificate payload for the Radius server, which is the authentication infrastructure that's part of your Wi-Fi network. So 802.1x networks will have a Radius server that helps your devices authenticate and prove that they can actually log onto the system. In our case, it was issued from the Entrust L1K intermediate certificate or Leaf certificate, which is not installed on a Mac, but the Entrust G2 root cert is. And because of that, every time a user joined the first time that our user joined a Wi-Fi network, they were prompted, do you want to trust the certificate from ise.whatever.com? It's the Radius server. And so the user would have to say yes only one time. We wanted to completely avoid that, and so we figured out that if we put it here, then it would automatically trust that and it would be marked that way. And again, this is just uploading a cert into the config profile. You want to add it to both profiles B and C because you're going to need to switch networks twice. And then the next thing is the ADCS profile, C. So for this one, you're going to need 2 certificate payloads, again, one for the Radius server and then one for ADCS. I want to point out something here that the name of the profile has Jamf config profile variables, $username and $serial number. I'm not sure if most of you know this, but you can actually do that in the name there. And there's a lot of other examples here like JSSID, site, email. You can plug these in and use them in lots of places. But for us, we wanted to have the config profile actually have the user's employee ID and their computer serial number for easy identification by support staff. The certificate is built, again, from that PKI cert that we installed in Jamf. That's here. And then the certificate subject, which goes to the PKI server, is listed there. They wanted us to use the full name, which is the user's last comma first. And then the template name here is the one that your PKI administrator will set up to start generating certificates. That must match. I believe it's case sensitive too, so double check that. And then the piece that we needed to supply in the request was the subject alternative name. And for us, that was the user principal name or user ID. And for us, it would be the username at the domain. Now, you want to make sure to include the certificate for the Radius server in there. That's really important. Again, set it to auto join. It's WPA3 Enterprise. And then under the protocols, you would choose TLS. And then for the trust settings, this is the one that made the automatic join really sweet because we're setting the identity certificate, right? So that's the one we just configured in the other certificate payload. And then we're also marking that Radius server certificate as trusted and giving it the common name of the server's fully qualified domain name. This enables a completely seamless auto join to the Wi-Fi network. So here are the 4 smart groups, A, B, max with profile A, max with profile B, max with profile C, and max enrolled after the launch date. So max with profile blah, I would strongly recommend you use profile identifier, and the reason is that the profile name criteria uses has, which is a fuzzy match, versus is, which is an exact match. Name is easier to document for humans, but it could lead to ambiguity, and you want to try to avoid that unless you're using a really unique name that wouldn't possibly be duplicated. For safety purposes, it's probably better to use the ID. To get the profile identifier, you can either scope it to your test Mac and run the profiles command and do some text filtering using awk or sat or grep, whatever you prefer to use. I'm sorry about that. Or you can install one of 2 apps, either the iMazing profile editor or low profile. And here's a quick screenshot of those. iMazing has the profile identifier listed right here. And low profile has the identifier right there. So you're going to copy that and paste that into your smart group. Then max enrolled after launch date. This is basically you deciding that on a specific date, you're no longer going to deploy the old certificate, and you want to exclude that one from any Mac that's enrolled after a certain point. So this would be part of your decision to when to start rolling out this project. Now, profile A, the original Wi-Fi profile, your target would probably be all computers at this point if every computer has it. Your exclusions need to have the following. You need to exclude the smart group of max with profile B, and max with profile C, and max enrolled after launch date, because you don't want this profile to be present when any of the others are there. The exclusion of max profile B is what causes profile A to be removed. As soon as Quantum Leap appears on the machine, this is now in exclusion, so it gets yanked from the machine by Jamf. The same thing with profile C. once it's done and Profile C or ADCS is installed, you never ever want this one to appear again. And also, you don't want it to appear for a new machine that already has the ADCS profile on it, because then you'd have two Wi-Fi configurations, and that would really be terrible. And then, of course, you want to exclude this for Macs enrolled after the launch date, because you don't want to set up a race condition where you have profiles, multiple profiles installing, removing, installing, removing, because they're all in scope together. Ask me how I know. Profile B is the one that you're going to target gradually for rolling out. So you start it with no computers, but you're going to exclude Macs with Profile C, which is your end game, and Macs enrolled after the launch date. You don't need this profile on a Mac after the launch date, because they're only going to get the new one. This is specifically for Macs that have the old one and you're migrating them. Then Profile C, of course, is initially targeted to no computers when you set it up, but you're going to exclude Macs with Profile A, original Wi-Fi. The reason this one says no computers first is because you don't want to set it to all computers right away, because you still have Profile B scoped to no computers. Eventually, you're going to change it to all computers, and I mentioned that later on. For special handling, we had some exclusions and some requests from businesses to roll this out at their own pace. So we created an extension attribute to allow them to opt out if they wanted. We had smart groups for business units that we had defined in Jamf. Any exclusions that you add there must be added to both profiles B and C, and remove them when you're ready. And of course, little by little, you'll add computers into scope in Profile B, Quantum Leap, and what'll happen is they'll just start ripping out Profile A, Profile B is there, Profile C gets installed, and B comes out, and it's all done. So as you keep adding more and more computers in, you'll be targeting all computers, but then no computers will be in scope. And in getting to 0, you may find some challenges here. We have Macs in our environment that didn't follow the standard username convention. They were set up a long time ago with UPNs that didn't follow our current standard. And so we have to hunt those down. And then business units might want to opt out or hold off for a little bit. You might have VIP, white glove executive users that exec support says, hold on, we want to do that individually with them. And then we do have some Macs in our environment that were still enrolled manually and not through automated device enrollment. That's up to you if you want to exclude those. We decided to do that because if they start having problems with the old certificates, we want them to think about refreshing that Mac because it's been on the machine that long and they probably have an older Mac, or consider backing up their data, erasing, and then starting fresh on an ADE enrolled Mac. So yeah, that's it. That's Quantum Leap. I guess it's time for questions now.
Awesome, and we do have several questions. I'm going to start with a thank you from the audience because there are people actually going through this exact process right this second, so very timely.
Terrific.
Do you have the QR code for the presentation? Is that something that you could bring up real quick?
The
one that
beg
you
your
shared
pardon,
at
what
the
code?
beginning one? The QR code?
The QR code for the presentation?
Yeah, the one that you shared right at the front. Get it to you later, right?
Yes.
All right. Awesome. Okay, we got some good questions. Here's the top one. Moving forward, how will you handle certificate expiration and renewals?
Oh, thank you for asking that. So the ADCS certificates that we're deploying are actually designed to automatically renew. So when they get near expiration, and this is in Jamf's documentation, I think it's within 30 or 45 days, I think. I'm probably wrong, but basically as it gets close to expiration, the certificate will automatically renew. And even if it's past expiration, we tested this too. We had a cert template that issued it for like 1 week, and then we waited well after expiration to turn a computer back on. And as soon as it got to the internet and talked to Jamf, Jamf issued it a brand new cert. So even if you have a user that goes on leave, you have a computer sitting in a drawer somewhere for a couple of months, if the cert's expired, just turn it on and connect it to the internet and it'll issue a new one.
Cool. If you didn't have the Wi-Fi mobile SSID used for the transition, how would you have done things differently?
If we didn't have that, I think we would have explained that option 5, which was install and then remove, would have caused consternation with our users, and we would have asked them to consider standing up a Wi-Fi network for the duration of the migration. We had thought about having a window of, say, 90 days to do the full migration, and that should be enough time to catch almost everybody. And so then we would have that additional SSID published just for that short term. It was the Wi-Fi engineer who didn't want to publish additional permanent SSIDs due to potential performance degradation. I think, though, in looking at this, that the degradation is worse on 802.11g and 802.11a networks that had there were lower frequencies and lower bandwidth. I don't think that's so much of a problem on N so much, or certainly not on AC or X networks or AX. But we didn't want to discount that concern, because certainly you don't want to have a ton of networks published. I would say that just having one stood up temporarily would be probably fine. I don't believe that. Actually, no, I think you could do this. If you had a hidden SSID, a managed profile should be able to connect to it. So that would be one way to get around the beacon problem, is having a hidden SSID that does not advertise, but that is still there. And then the profile would tell it to connect to that network. So yeah.
Cool. This one is probably an easy one. WPA 3E was your requirement. Can this be used with WPA 2 Enterprise?
Certainly can be used with WPA 2 Enterprise. It could be used with open networks if you like living dangerously. But WPA 2 has already been compromised in some way. There were some, like, I don't remember the name of it, but it was like crack something. There was a specific exploit that had been announced that could brute force a WPA2 password pretty easily. And so for security reasons, we wanted to go to WPA3. Given that we found out that Catalina was the first version to support WPA3, we felt like this was a perfectly fine requirement, since at the time we did this, Catalina was already just out of support since Ventura had been released, and we didn't want to compromise security just to support an older platform. But yes, technically you can do it with WPA2.
And you answered this one, but probably worth a quick review. When swapping between profiles, were there any issues trusting the certificate used to authenticate and trust radius? A report of similar configuration, and it would require the user to trust that cert in the keychain. And you talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think so. The key was having the cert installed as a separate payload in the profile, and then going to the trust settings on Wi-Fi and marking that as trusted, and adding the fully qualified domain name of the Radius server. And you would discover that on your own by connecting to the Radius on a new to the Wi-Fi on a new machine where you hadn't previously trusted it, and you would be able to read that certificate. You could examine the certificate and then read the FQDN of that server. And then if you were still in doubt, ask your Wi-Fi administrator. Any other hot button questions?
You talked about getting to 0, and somebody asked specifically if a computer hasn't been powered on while the transition was happening. How do you resolve that?
If the computer hasn't been powered on while the transition was happening, so we said we wanted to get it all done in 90 days, but we left it sort of open-ended so that we could catch the stragglers. At some point, though, after 90 days, we have a rule that we mark machines as unmanaged after that, and if they don't show up after like 6 months, we kind of flag them, and we ask our support teams to try to find it. And then if it really comes to that and you can't keep that temporary network up for more than 90 days, hopefully you can find your stragglers. They'll call into the help desk anyway and say, I can't connect to the Wi-Fi anymore. And then you have a process for that. You write a knowledge base article that tells them exactly why this happened and what they missed while they were orbiting Mars or on leave or whatever was going on in their life, and then just get them through that and install the new certificate.
Cool. Did your PKI team have any reservations about having the entire fleet request new certificates in a short time frame?
I asked them about that, performance considerations, and whether they thought the ADCS server could handle, potentially thousands of concurrent requests on a single day, and they said that it was fine, that they thought it could handle it, and we never saw any delays in that. I will tell you though, Jamf will not distribute the profile until the ADCS server says, I'm ready, here's your certificate. So it's not going to try to, so the way it works is that Jamf requests the certificate, the ADCS proxy actually requests the certificate first, then it sends it back to Jamf. Jamf bundles it in the profile, and it will not distribute that profile until it's all ready to go. So does that, I think that helps, I think.
Yeah. Got a question about somebody on an air-gapped network.
Ooh.
Is there no programmatic local method to kick the Mac onto recognizing the Wi-Fi profile?
Is there no programmatic method to, what was that other part?
Kick the Mac into recognizing the Wi-Fi profile. We have this exact issue with an air-gapped network, and we can't use an intermediary Wi-Fi.
Okay, so on an air-gapped network, it's unfortunate that this person is not in the room, or at least I'm assuming they're not in the room. Maybe they are, but I would wonder if both networks weren't visible there, and I'm assuming air-gapped, they must be either in the DoD or working for like a media company that has a secure area where they are working on secret projects and whatnot. So you cannot script installations of configuration profiles. That is no longer allowed. In fact, that stopped working in Big Sur, I believe, because if you try to do that, it won't work, and you will get, I believe it triggers a message on screen that the user has to go click on the profile to review it and then install it. For sure, if you try to double-click on a profile on the desktop, which is effectively side-loading, it will stop the profile from being installed, and you have to go to profiles and review it anyway. Pretty much Apple only wants config profiles to be deployed via MDM. They ran into a lot of security problems with side loading, and certainly a lot of those are warranted. So if they can figure out a way to do that with MDM, that's really best. If it truly is a situation with an air-gapped network, they might have to take the computers out briefly. They're probably going to have to do a security review and explain that process. But yeah, there's not really many other ways around that, I think.
And this one relates pretty close. If the original profile was installed via self-service and the profile's inserts were not available for auto removal by being added as an exclusion of the new profiles, did you run into that at all?
Yeah, so we had some profiles that were installed manually a while ago, and you can remove those with the profiles command. I can't remember the exact flag that you can use, but yes, if it was installed via self-service, like manually, you can remove those. You can also, I'm not trying to think what else you could do. They were installed via self-service. Once they're out of scope, I believe they would still get removed. But yeah, that's a good question. I would say you'd have to play with that if they were installed via self-service. And if you are a shop that is using a self-service method for like Wi-Fi profiles, you might have to consider option one, which is the self-service install. Maybe that's okay for really small fleets, 100 to 500 max. We're at 10,000 plus, so we know a self-service method was not feasible for us. So we had to try to automate this as much as possible. But specifically, if it started as a self-service profile and you're going to a managed one, the answer is I don't know, because we didn't test that because we hadn't been using that. So I would say try that out and see what works, but yes.
Awesome. One last question. This is a little bit of an upstream process question.
Okay.
Your profile demonstrated using the username variable. When does the Mac get a username in your enrollment process?
Thank you. I'm sorry I failed to mention that. The device record in Jamf has the username. That's basically who it's assigned to. And for us, that used to happen during user-initiated enrollment when users would, well, actually the computers were being enrolled by either IT technician or our value-added reseller, and they were being assigned to a user at that time. A user could have logged into UIE as well, the Jamf/enroll URL. So that would set the username value. Once we moved to automated device enrollment, during the remote management screen, we require authentication at that stage. And so then that would set the username record on the computer. Other ways that you could populate that field would be at the desktop after the person's logged in. Maybe you could present a dialogue and say, ask who are you? I don't have Jamf Connect, so I don't know if Jamf Connect would populate the username record as well. Maybe somebody in the room could tell me if it does or not, if they use it. It does? Okay, so there you go. If you have Jamf Connect, it's going to populate the username record too. So the username record comes from the user and location part of the device record.
Awesome. Great presentation. Thank you,
Thank
Brad.
you. Thank you all for coming. And special thanks to my friends and family, my colleagues, and especially my wife, my very, very patient tester in all of this, and reviewing my presentation. So thank you all.